Hi, it's Todd. Today I am taking a look at the Ready reference sheets. This was as you can see from the picture here, a game aid developed for Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s by a company called Judges Guild, who made a lot of excellent supplements, not just for Dungeons and Dragons, but for many games. But this is sort of one of, I guess, the standouts, one of the gems that has come across to us through time, and that can still be a very powerful tool, a great tool, regardless of the game you're playing. Though it probably suits best the sort of classic old school game that it was originally intended for. But let's open her up and take a look. As you can see, it's got these sort of very classic typewriter filled pages, lots and lots of tables, lots and lots of tables. And there is a certain element of document mastery that you'll need to sort of parse everything together. Because it's not always clear how these things all fit together. I know many times I'm looking at it and I'll have to flip back and forth multiple times to find sort of a table and then a subtable, or how two particular things are supposed to be stringed together. There are probably people who are much more expert at this than I am, but ultimately what it gives you is a tremendous resource. And this resource is really useful for when you're running kind of sandbox sort of hex crawl campaigns, because it gives you lots of tools for generating encounters and generating just typography and geography and places that you could use if you're running a campaign and your players go somewhere maybe that you hadn't prepped or you didn't expect. You can turn to the reference sheets and they can kind of bail you out. And if not bail you out, then give you sort of inspiration to use. So I'll go through a few of these just to give you an idea. I know that I was able to get this copy a few years ago on eBay. They don't seem to be going for too much money. I don't know if there's just a glut of these floating around. I'm not sure. I know some of the Judges Guild materials have been reprinted. I think Goodman Games has reprinted a bunch of the modules and adventures that Judges Guild created. I don't know if anybody has reprinted these reference sheets. I am 99% sure that you can get them on drive-through, and if I can find the link, I will drop it into the show notes if you're looking at this on YouTube. So with that said, let's open her back up and take a look. So you can see through the table of contents there is a lot of stuff. One of the really great ones I like, and I think these encounters here are geared for their city state of the the Extreme Overlord. They basically had a huge sort of campaign setting that revolved around the city state. And the city state, if you were inside there, is actually a quite dangerous place. It wasn't like the safe places that you encounter now, where we think of a town as a place that adventurers might go to get away from trouble and kind of lay low. You could potentially get into lots of trouble running around in the streets of the city state. And so one of the first things they have there is this whole setup for encountering stuff, in the city. And you can see from the encounter types here at the top, attacked by surprise, attacked, slanders or insults. So 3 out of the 5 encounter types right off the bat are essentially hostile, right? One of them or 2 of them are just you're attacked outright. And the third one is probably something that's going to lead to combat or has a high potential of leading to combat, though, given that it's just talk, there is a chance that, the players could de-escalate things. But you can see right there, these are not the kind of encounters that you usually think of in just your run-of-the-mill city. It's dangerous. And then you can go down and you look at these tables of who you encountered. It could be just regular people, it could be unusual people. You never know what you're going to run into in the city state. And they have even different quarters of the city, and which quarter you're in will also determine kind of what you can run into. So you've got the most chance of just running normal or running into normal people, and then 1 out of 6 of running into something strange, and 1 out of 6 of rolling into something that's particular to a quarter. So if you're in the noble quarter, it's going to be mostly, police types, military types, nobles. If you're in common areas, you could see that you've got a lot of different things you're going into: goblins, orcs, bandits, dwarves, giant rats. If you're in a plaza, you hear these different things you go into. So yeah, right then and there, you're getting a lot of variety, obviously through these rolling dice of what you're gonna find. Additionally, and that's not even the unusual table, right? That's just the depending on what quarter you're in. On the unusual table, you've got trolls, harpies, lamassu, blink dogs, zombies, skeletons. These are all on city streets. You don't usually think of, you're going from the tavern to the merchant shop or the blacksmith, and you're going to run into a band of zombies or skeletons or, a golden dragon or a mind flayer. But here you have somewhat of a chance of doing so. And, in addition to all of that, you've got sort of a social level. You can figure out what kind of noble you have. Is it a gentleman? Is it a military? And then you have, even on top of that, special style encounters, which can't quite see there. So you have just this page gives you a lot. Now, some of it is crazy. And again, part of that comes from its heritage is working with that city-state setting that is kind of a little bit gonzo, a little bit crazy, and particularly sort of violent and dangerous. But it's easy to think of if you happen to roll and you roll those dice and you end up with some zombies or skeletons, what does that mean for your town? As the dungeon master, you can imagine perhaps an event, something mysterious that resulted in there being a bunch of zombies or a bunch of skeletons or a troll is loose. And that's what I think for me, the power of the kind of the reference sheets is that they sort of shake things up. If you take those results and you kind of run with them and you say, well, I just wanted to roll to see if anything was in town, and they have a troll. What does that mean? A troll is loose. Think about sort of Harry Potter. There's a troll loose in the school. And then once you have that, then the players can deal with it or not. Then suddenly you have something to work with. Maybe you had a plot hook that was floating out there, something you wanted them to take on, and they hadn't done it. So you think, well, maybe the troll was sent by, if there was an evil wizard, let's say, well, maybe that troll was charmed by the wizard, and that's why it was in town. It was following this charming. How did it get into town? Well, maybe there's some kind of secret entrance, or a guard was paid off, or there's a large sewer that they could get into, or there's a trap door in the bottom of an abandoned church. You get all kinds of things that you can use to fill out this incident, which started off as just some random dice, and maybe you thought, boy, that's a kooky result. I'm not even sure if I want it, but I'm going to roll with it. And by rolling with it, you end up with perhaps an interesting either hook into something that exists, or now you have something new that you can have. Maybe you didn't really have a plan. They were back in town at the end of an adventure, and you just thought, I don't know what's going to happen. I'll just see what floats their boat, and we'll just kind of do some maintenance and call it a night. And now suddenly you've got something. Suddenly now you have a troll. What does that troll mean? Depending on what happens to the players, maybe there's some, there's some reason for them just out of that encounter for the players to figure out what's going on. Maybe it just becomes something the players are going to ask themselves about this troll and follow it up. Maybe it inspires a contact or some kind of patron of the characters to step in and say, hey, I'm going to offer you some gold or some other assistance if you could find out what happened with that troll. It's also a way of just shaking up your world. A lot of times the kind of safe spaces, which oftentimes end up being the kind of villages and cities, can feel kind of static because nothing ever changes. The guy who's the bartender is always the bartender, and he'll be the bartender for years and years, and the blacksmith, the same blacksmith. Well, if you have something like skeletons or a troll or something, that can put some of these people, the village itself, potentially in jeopardy. And I think that's a good thing. Sort of like they say that healthy forests need, forest fires to kind of clear things up and give room for other things to grow. By the same token, a random event like an attack by the undead or a troll or whatever, maybe a giant, can help shake things up in a good way, force you to relook at your location and some NPCs. And maybe it'd be interesting if they're going to the blacksmith, the troll pops up, attacks them, kills the blacksmith. Now what? Now, maybe the PCs don't care about that blacksmith, but now whatever they were going to him for, they can't get done because he was the only blacksmith in town. So now what do? Maybe the blacksmith has kids or a patron and that leads to something. Again, you can just see how just sort of ideas generate off of ideas, and all that starts because you actually take away a block of your town and let something else grow up in its stead. And, what does that mean? Was the blacksmith the target of the troll? And then what does that do? Was somebody else trying to take over? Had he made an enemy? And again, things that can keep getting your wheels turning, over and over again. So we've got lots of these, and there's some crazy stuff in here, like some of the female encounters. And one thing to keep in mind with these materials, or sort of anything that comes of this time, is it is of its time, and it's not as the sensibilities are not as evolved as they are now. So you run into some things you can run into, particularly with regards to females in some of these settings. It's a little bit rough, and a little bit maybe beyond what most people would want to have in their campaigns now. Things like slavery, or sexual slaves or sexual sex workers in these places. And whether you want those in your game, or you don't, just understand that you may run into them in a resource like this, because at that time, it was, particularly with the setting that Judges Guild was working in, it was sort of, everything is open. So, you have to keep that in mind. And if you get a result that doesn't suit you or your group or your sensibilities, you just skip it. So again, I'm just going to flip through some of these. It's hard to, obviously you're not gonna be able to see just looking at it on video just how much kind of stuff there are, from things like crime, trial, and punishment that gives you, again, a whole bevy of tools you can use for putting together crimes and trials and what sorts of punishments there might be. And here you have advertising. These are all beggars. Amazing stuff. And here you have poisons. So one of the things that used to be sort of a feature in high level play in the original game and in classical games was sort of the building of fortresses or towers, and that was kind of your end game goal, or certainly a feature of the end game. If you got to be high enough level, you would start to attract followers. You would start to you would have taken your own fortress or castle, or you might have been given a plot of land, or you simply would have taken it just by your own force, and you had enough money at this point. Then you would start to lay down roots and kind of enter sort of a domain building segment of the game, or building and management. And you could do a lot of good things about it. Matt Colville did a whole Kickstarter about that's bringing that kind of concept back and sort of updating it for 5th edition. But this was a big thing. And I don't know back in the day how many people actually went through and built fortresses and towers, but it was certainly something that in the white box. And again, here you can see there's all kinds of tools and things for what to build, how much it costs, how long it'll take. And here again, for wizards, a whole bunch of things you can do with potions. Wizards had towers, and fighters had castles, and I don't know if there was a separate name for clerics. And there's some interesting stuff, even to the point where, in the classic wilderness, you could actually run into these NPC-controlled castles and towers and things like that, and they might come out and challenge you. They might put a Gaius spell on you to have you go fulfill some kind of quest for them. There's a lot of kind of fun stuff, and that eventually, your characters would kind of take their place and have their sort of domain. Anyway, to keep on moving on, some of the things in here are sort of edition specific. The Monster Compendium, it's going to work great for you if you're playing an OSR game or a classic D&D game, because that's the kind of format and the stats are in. If you're playing fifth edition and you want to use this, it's not going to be very helpful to you. Same with these kind of checklists. And, this is the white box, 0 edition kind of D&D tables and things. And so they're not going to be useful to you if you're not playing that. They still can be kind of fun to look at and give you kind of a window on sort of how people were playing, but they are of limited use. We're going to just keep flying through here. How often you get underwater encounter tables? Well, you've got it there if you need it. Wishes and limited wishes, quests and gaiuses. So, here again, you can use this as something as that tool if you run into a weird or wild wizard out in the middle of nowhere and he casts a spell and sends you on a quest, or I think clerics have gaius and wizards have some other, the spell might be called quest, or it might have been, I don't remember. And you need some kind of inspiration as to what they're going to do with you, or what you're going to do with your players. Again, they got tables for that. They got tables for all sorts of that stuff. And then here, hirelings, a wonderful table about negotiating and morale. Morale is sort of a big deal, and I'll probably do a video about it because I feel like I think it's recognized by certain segment of the GMing reffing population, but it's something that could probably use a wider usage, particularly I think in modern editions where it kind of gets short shrift. It is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it doesn't get a lot of play, and it's something that I don't know whether some of the more sort of famous GMs out there in the Twitterverse and whatever, like Matt Mercer and people, if they use it, it's not something that comes through necessarily in their videos, but it's definitely an important feature. And so you have that. And, again, I'm just going to flip through some of the stuff, but lots of useful things. It's not a unified book. It's just going to jump from one topic to the other, and it doesn't always make sense. It'll just kind of go. But so here's another great section. You're searching for stuff in a dungeon, right? You as a dungeon master, if you're playing a module, if you're playing your own homebrew dungeon or building, whatever you've created, you may not oftentimes have inspiration for every single room or every hallway. But players are, often they're gonna search every nook and cranny. Well, here are tables for things you can roll for to see if they find little knickknack stuff that you may not have felt the need to describe. You enter a room and you maybe say something about its general furnishing quality level, and someone goes, well, I want to search over there. Okay, well, there's a table, there's whatever, wherever you want there to be, to give you an idea, there's stuff to look at for you. This page I really like because if you're hex crawling, if you need something, if you want to put a monument somewhere and you don't know what it is, here's a whole bunch of tables where you can roll through and look at kind of what perhaps a landmark there is sitting in some hex or some area that your party may be traveling through, And again, you can lots of tables, and sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to figure out how these go together because sometimes the tables will reference other tables. So if I hit, ruins, I'm not really disposed to say, I'm going to look at the conditions. Okay, they're partially covered. And then I'm supposed to kind of roll here and say, okay, what's covering them? Could be slime, which is interesting. It's okay, it's crystallized and petrified. Again, interesting. And then is there something guarding it? And most often there is going to be something. It might just be a trap of some sort. It might be a giant. It might be some lycanthropes, werewolves, whatnot, were creatures. Might be some kind of dragon. There's a lot there. But then you're supposed to kind of go to this ruins, and then you're supposed to really then come down here and roll on the ruins table. And then if you roll manor, you're supposed to go to the manor table, and so on down the line. And everything's laid out to be so compressed, and there's it's given it such a kind of plain typewriter style type. They don't do a very good job differentiating relationships between these. You kind of have to just go through it and do it a few times to discover how you're going to roll down these tables. And do I need to roll? It's almost like, okay, I roll one and then I'm looking for, does that mean the thing, or am I supposed to find a sub table that's called that and then roll on that one again? But I think if you put in the effort to decipher and then do that, you can get some really fascinating, interesting things that can, add to your game. When you need stuff in a pinch, it's really great to be able to just flip open this book, and it just feels like somewhere in here will be something, to help you. So this one I like to use a lot too. And this one's all about finding stuff, features, again, mostly would say a hexcrawl or some kind of, you're in the wilderness traveling, sort of what's there, and not so much in an encounter level, right? It's more geographical. It'll have sort of flora and fauna, so you can get animals and things. But it's not so much meant for here's the random encounter. It's more like when you're in a situation that you're entering a hex or a segment of a hex, or again, whatever unit of sort of travel you're going into, you can fall into the habit of just saying, hey, it's forest and there's more forest, and oh, there's another forest, and there's a clearing, and on the other clearing, there's more forest. It can become stale, right? Hills on top of hills on top of hills, and you're sort of, maybe your mind is trying to figure out, how can I make these hills, come alive in a sense? How can I differentiate one hill from another? I'm not really trying to necessarily put something, an obstacle necessarily, though it can be an obstacle. I just want to make it feel like we're not running through some hexes on a sheet that just says hill, and so all I have to offer is hill. So you can roll dice. This will tell you kind of how far you can see. Kind of gives you an idea of, well, if you're in a light forest, you have, here's kind of your distances, and here's your sort of probabilities of seeing stuff. So you have your distance, the sort of, I think, height, I guess, in feet or meters, how tall you're off the ground, what kind of weather you're going to get, flora, animal, all kinds of stuff. And I even actually forget. I think some of these are supposed to roll, some of these are just straight. Is it percentage? I can't even remember. But you roll on those, you can get sort of water features, and they're not your main water features, right? If you're looking on your hex map, you're only going to have the biggest kind of features mentioned. So a hex with a hill symbol on it does not mean that every square foot of that hex is just a hill or many hills, right? Or that outside of where you might have a river, that there's no water in the world. So you might say, okay, in this particular hex, there happens to be and they've got these great names because they're trying to differentiate through all these sizes: a rivulet, a brook, a runnel, a brooklet, a rill, a streamlet, whatever it is. Okay, they found some water, or maybe they found a spring, or they found some quicksand, or there's a geyser there. Interesting features, and just ways for you to roll ahead of your party. If they're entering a space, what's in that space? Maybe there's a geyser, maybe there's quicksand, which would be something for them to perhaps overcome or move around if they recognize it. But some way, and then you can mark down in your map that now there's sort of this thing there. It's not just a hill. It's, there's quicksand there, maybe in a valley, between the hills. And then, even within, say, finding some of these water features, what is it doing in this area? It's getting shallower, it's getting deeper, it's partially blocked. There's some kind of falls, there's rapids. There's some kind of little aisle or bar in the middle of the water. It narrows, it widens, all these great things. And, flora, there's mold. It's what size is the mold, or, what size are the flowers? Are they young? Are they old? Are they growing? So you have all these ways you can roll down just using a series of dice and really kind of populate your world with stuff. So here you have, prospecting. If you're in an area where you think there might be minerals, or your party has geared themselves up with hammers and all kinds of picks and things like that, they're welcome to take a shot, and you can generate some things for them to find. Perhaps they can even get a whole second career just in mining stuff, And then here you have more obstacles. This is, again, kind of going back to terrain management. Here, there's all kinds of sort of physical features that you can find. You sort of pick what kind of terrain you're in. You can roll down the list, and you kind of roll into these, and you can find, okay, you're in some kind of cul-de-sac. Okay, you found some flowers. You found a trap. You're in a swamp now, or you see it ahead of you. And so it gives you all these different things that you can use to basically fill out your hexes. And I've used it to great effect. I don't know if my players will find a great effect, but at least for me, it's helped, because oftentimes when you're trying to describe lots of these areas, it's those little details. When people talk about Tolkien and how he, maybe to some boring, but, describing all the trees and everything and kind of giving it a whole sort of look, it's great to be able to use something like this. I find I can tell, okay, where am I? I'm in sort of middle latitudes, and I want to, all right, let me roll on here. And they come across, blackberries, right? Or maybe I don't know if they call a field of blackberries or a grove of blackberries or strawberries. And that, what does that do? Well, for me, I feel like it helps me and hopefully the players visualize the world, right? We kind of have an idea of what blackberries are. Suddenly it goes from just kind of featureless terrain to there are blackberries. And then what does that also mean? Well, that means that maybe they can pick those blackberries for food, and maybe that will trigger the players to do something. If they were looking for something else, maybe they'll say, oh, do we see any tracks or anything? Maybe we need meat. Do we see tracks of something that was coming to feed on the blackberries? And that then opens up avenues. The worst thing you can do is just add detail to your world. And I've gone through and gotten results that I wasn't particularly familiar with. Like, what's one? Like, I don't know, like, yeah, bladderwort, or I kind of know belladonna a little bit, but I don't really know what it looks like. Or some of these other plants, I kind of know them literally, but I don't know what they look like. So I would pull them up on Wikipedia, and then I wouldn't even use their names, but I would then use them to describe the kind of trees or bushes or berries or whatever they are. And so maybe in my campaign, I would roll on this table and I got, what is that? I got, ragweed, or I got an, gorse, or foxglove maybe is one, or columbine or hollyhock. All of those, I don't know particularly what they look like. My players don't particularly probably know what they look like either, but I can find a picture, I can find some descriptions, and then I can read them to descriptions. And maybe in my world, it's not really just straight up, foxglove, but I can figure out what it is, but it's something that becomes like a landmark, and maybe later on they're trying to find their way back, and that becomes something they can find. Oh, wait, I remember there was a grove of these trees with a certain kind of leaves. Do I see those? Yes, you do. They're over here. Okay, great. That tells us how to get home. Or now we can use that we need somewhere to camp. It's not just some trees, and we have this specific location, and I can look at the pictures and I can use that to inform if someone wants to say, well, can I climb this tree? No, it's not that kind of tree. Or I can say, oh yeah, it's a great tree, or it's this way, or it's that way. And so I have, instead of just randomly coming up with, just out of my mind, a particular tree, now I have something that I can use as a model. And because you're apt to get different results, you'll fill out your world with all kinds of different types of these details. You won't have all your trees won't be basically one type of tree that you think of in your head. Maybe I always think of maple trees in my head, so every tree I describe tends to look or behave like a maple tree. This forces me to kind of get some different inspirations, which then will make my world feel more varied. It's also something you can obviously do in advance. You could roll up a whole bunch of stuff for hexes that you're going into, and so that you'll have all this stuff at your table if you're playing live, and you don't want to be using a computer or looking up tables or pulling out your phone to check Wikipedia. Just roll a few of these in advance, and that way you'll just have them right there in your notebook of what's there, and then you can just pull them up as you need to. And that is pretty much, so here, here's more stuff, all kinds of animals that you could throw in there. That's pretty much the end of the book. There's some ads. Okay, Invincible. I don't know why I was spacing out in the name. City State Invincible Overlord, which is excellent. Very strange, very violent. Definitely worth reading. I don't know if that got a re-release or not, but you get to see some ads. There it is. There's the judge looking over his guild. I hope I've demonstrated or shown some of the value in the ready reference sheets. It's certainly a tool to add to your toolbox. It has a lot of value to it. It is not particularly thick, as you can see, but it is packed full of goodies. Though those goodies may take a little bit of effort to get the most out of, I think it's definitely worth it. I hope you enjoyed this look at it. If you did, please think about subscribing. That would help me out a lot. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.